They stood before the beast they were tasked to destroy, a giant boar of grotesque form. Licht was the only one left alive, perhaps because it hadn't bothered to kill a healer. Or maybe it was just hesitating to strike. The monstrous boar snorted triumphantly, looking at the blood of the warriors pooling on the jagged stone floor of the massive cavern. Their bodies lay scattered, bruised, and bloodied. The beast's work had been thorough, merciless. Licht acknowledged its power, but he knew his own safety wouldn't last if he let the situation continue. With determination in his eyes, he raised his hand and a small speck of light appeared in the air. It quickly expanded into a brilliant glow, its rays weaving into curves and then forming into lines of powerful text. He loudly chanted the revival command, initiating a counterattack. At first, nothing changed. The air in the cave remained damp and thick with the stench of death. The bodies lay still, unmoving. He had summoned the entire party not long ago, their weapons resting beside their cold corpses. Then suddenly, one of their hands twitched. Returning from their interrupted journey to the underworld, the fallen began to rise. The knight, once clad in shining armor, shot up, gripping a strangely designed sword in his hand. "I am a living weapon, do not judge," he said. Then swung his sword, cleaving the monstrous boar in two. Its sturdy spine offered no resistance to the blow. They returned to town after completing their mission, rejoicing to be under the blue sky instead of that cold, dark dungeon. Their joy was made complete when they received a large bag of gold as a reward. One of the creatures they had hunted was on the wanted list. As usual, they would split the reward evenly among the four of them. Licht received his fair share, and the team began to discuss their strangely easy journey, with Licht constantly pulling them back from the brink of death. "Did I miss anything?" he joked. While dying wasn't exactly fun, it wasn't as bad as staying on the other side. The team showered Licht with praise, happy to have him with them. However, Licht kept his power a secret, fearing they would abuse it. The girl patted his back affectionately, while the larger man clapped him on the shoulder, and the group's leader, Alan, expressed his absolute faith, saying he trusted Licht completely and expected him to keep up the good work. With a serious gaze, he said that he had very high expectations for Licht. Thanks to Licht's support, they had been able to defeat all sorts of monsters without needing revival magic, though he was always kept around for his usefulness. The next major quest the group took on, after officially becoming the Esther Adventurers, was to investigate a small shrine, and it was here that the real story began. It was gradually discovered that Licht had been betrayed by humanity. His gift of resurrection could actually bring back even demons. So, under the guise of being loyal and trustworthy, the team led Licht into a trap. Cold-hearted knight stabbed him straight through the chest, then pushed him off a cliff in the forest, carrying out a brutal assassination. The captain of the guard had completely overlooked the possibility that Licht's power could activate automatically. No one knew about Licht's return, as they all assumed he was truly dead after the push from the cliff. Skyrim style, a fuss roda, if you will. While contemplating his revenge, Licht wondered which of his teammates had revealed his resurrection ability to the kingdom. But he quickly concluded that he should get out of there before sunset. Just because he couldn't die didn't mean he was immune to hunger or the creatures lurking in the forest. Betrayed by the very kingdom he once served, Licht decided to head towards the sea, far away from those who had tried to kill him. In a matter of days, perhaps only hours, he had reached the coast. The exact time was unclear, but his objective was crystal clear. What would happen if they discovered that the person they had tried to wipe off the face of the earth had magically popped back into existence? It was impossible to guess what forces would be mobilized to deal with this problem. In this world, the ratio of humans to demons is about 1 to 7. Licht had heard a rumor that near the area he was searching, there was a rather suspicious dungeon, a place where he might find the help he needed. No intelligent creature would refuse his unique skill. He risked coming here based solely on an unreliable source and a bit of intuition, embarking on a solitary journey. Without comrades by his side, there was little he could do. Just keeping himself alive was a miracle. But in the end, it was just a worthless rumor. Licht collapsed, his knees trembling, falling to the ground as rage boiled up inside him. On the horizon, the calm sea slipped by under the twinkling starlight, as if mocking him. In a fit of fury, Licht picked up a stone and threw it hard at a nearby rock jutting out of the water. He bowed his head in shame when he realized the sound of the impact wasn't like hitting stone. It was the sound of solid metal. Concealed by an illusion, an exquisite metal door whose beauty could not be fully captured in black and white. Without hesitation, Licht threw himself into the ocean, ready for his own personal journey across the Atlantic, hoping not to encounter any icebergs this time. Licht stood before the escape door, feeling a powerful pull that almost wanted to drag him inside. The ancient corridor stretched down deeper than any light could reach, and miraculously, he could still see without a lantern or any other light source. Then he decided to try a big move and cast a resurrection spell right in the middle of the vast dungeon. The floor shuddered with a deep echo as the magic flowed beneath his feet like a roaring current, pouring energy into the earth, answering the call of hungry souls wanting to return to their bodies. For a moment, Licht felt as if his soul was being drained, his brain melting. But he quickly refocused when he realized 5 girls had appeared before him. 5 strangely clear figures. It seemed to be an interesting team, consisting of 3 young girls, a mother figure, and a Victorian-style Gothic lady, most likely a vampire, leading us into this mysterious tale. The apparent leader of the demon girl group was a petite girl with long hair named Mao. Miss Goth pointed out that Licht was the only man here, and he must be the one who had resurrected them. Licht, seeing the girls, couldn't hide his confusion, and was especially wary of Mao, whom he eyed cautiously through his hair. Mao quickly ordered the other members to return to their designated guard posts, telling them to keep everyone away from this place while she had a little chat with Licht. As the servants left the room, Licht realized that Mao was the most powerful entity he had ever faced. An overwhelming energy enveloped the entire space, with the pressure emanating from her so heavy it was suffocating, as if crushing the very air around them. Mao wanted to know how they had been resurrected, since the entire group had been dead for about 100 years, and not even a necromancer could possibly revive someone whose body no longer existed. However, seeing that Licht had no threatening intentions, she softened, opened up, and asked if he wanted to join their cause. She remarked that Licht seemed to be in trouble, and this was the least she could do to help. Maya welcomed Licht into the Demon Lord's Legion, and introduced herself as the Demon Lord, but her real name was Arya. Mao was just her title, meaning Demon Lord. Licht introduced himself simply, without any flair, and Arya thanked him for his help in resurrecting the group. Licht was curious about the other members, and Arya, Her Majesty, explained that they were her loyal retainers. Arya's retainers were grateful to be resurrected, but they didn't hesitate to complain that their dirt beds weren't very comfortable. As those specially trusted by the Demon Lord, each of them possessed superior strength, probably enough to take down an army if needed, which was to be expected, as they served the Demon Lord directly. Their first task was to restore Dystopia, the dusty dungeon they were standing in. At least the old layout of the place hadn't changed in the last 100 years, and this place was also known as the Adventurer Killer in its heyday. Fortunately, this ancient structure was built to last and would serve as an ideal home for them once again. Licht asked if he could help any further, but Arya laughed and patted him on the back, telling him not to be foolish. Why would I bother sending you out to the battlefield? They highly valued Licht's special ability, a unique, irreplaceable main character power. They even had the perfect person to accompany him. Even so, Licht reminded Arya that the place was too vast for just the 4 of them to manage. Arya, seeming unconcerned, casually admitted that they didn't even have time to rest. She simply handed everything over to Licht without a second thought, leaving him to only sigh in exasperation. Though a bit discouraged, Licht told himself that this was still better than being out there where the kingdom could find him. He ventured deeper into the dungeon, to the second floor, just above Arya's quarters, and found one of the girls working hard, rearranging books. Her name is Ferris, the guardian of the corridor of melancholy. Ferris isn't human. She obviously couldn't be, tasked with a duty this deep inside the dungeon. Licht explained that he had permission from his superiors to help lighten her workload, and he'd come to see what he could do. Suddenly, Ferris knelt before him. As it turns out, Ferris was managing 5 different areas of the dungeon simultaneously. What made her situation even more difficult was that she had to protect the area closest to Arya, where the pressure was greatest against intruders. Licht realized that easing her burden wouldn't be simple, because Iris and Tice, the other guardians, worked in a pair, one who seemed to be the mother Elphys and the girl who called her big sister. The only viable option so far, was to install traps on Ferris's floor to make her defensive duties less strenuous. Licht continued down to the primeval garden to meet this pair. Tisa, the older one, was sipping tea up, while her younger sister Iris announced they had a visitor. Both of them already knew Licht's name, having overheard his conversation with Arya, and they assumed he was there to survey the situation. Licht continued to observe the current situation and offered a few suggestions, which made Tis and Iris a bit anxious. After listening for a while, Licht proposed that since the two of them were working together, which put the rest of the dungeon at an unfair disadvantage, they could split up to control separate areas. Tissé, however, quickly shot down the idea, explaining that she had always been Iris's big sister and their powers worked best when they were together. Separating was simply not practical. Finally, there was the Victorian goth girl named Rose, a vampire who controlled the Bat Cave. She shouldered the heaviest workload of all, managing as many as 7 different areas. Finally, like a slap to the face, it hit Licht. There was one person who could make their manpower problem a complete joke, a name every adventurer had heard of, the legendary summoner. Deciding to bring fairies along, Licht went out in search of this person. The gravekeepers were not pleased with the intruders and immediately attacked, targeting fairies first. A huge mistake just seconds that. After he managed to wound her, the gravekeeper collapsed on the spot as if from a horrific massacre. As Ferris revived, she approached Licht to thank him. Then Ferris turned back to the gravekeeper, drew a small knife, and finished him off. They continued their quest to find the stone tomb. The sky glittered with stars, and the sound of crickets began to fill the night. Their footsteps stopped before the very tombstone they had been searching for. Applying the infamous resurrection spell, a few rings popped out of the coffin. Reaching out to them, their master let out a soft sigh, asking for a little help to climb out. Fairies and Licht quickly helped, pulling the girl out and clearing away the rocks and dirt covering the newly resurrected summoner. A pretty young girl. After all, if they were going to resurrect her, they should have at least dug her up first. It's not exactly easy to breathe in a coffin. This time, they got straight to the point. They had resurrected her to find a new comrade, ideally to make use of her special talents, just as her title suggested. The girl immediately proved her abilities by correctly guessing that Ferris wasn't human, and then asked how they had revived her without creating a slave bond, something that usually came with that kind of magic. Licht explained his special ability, including the fact that he could resurrect himself. After that, the group quickly left the cemetery before reinforcements could arrive. Back in Dystopia, Necro got right to work, summoning an entire army from the underworld to guard the empty areas. It only took about 3 minutes to complete the entire summoning. Necro was also given her own area, making her another floor master. With this new support, the rest of the members could relax a bit, as the spirits held down the weaker areas and reinforced the previously spotty defense lines. Necro had never thought she'd be working under the Demon King, and she asked why a human like Licht would team up with demons, a question anyone might ask, especially since he wore armor that looked like a giant cross. He couldn't go back to the human world now because, well, it was best not to think about that. Switching over to Alan in the capital, the girl with him asked if they'd found a replacement for Licht yet. Normally, everyone had to fight on the front lines to protect the healer, but Licht was an exception. Recovery mages are usually weak, but Licht wasn't a support class. He possessed the skill to resurrect the dead. Thanks to that, he was strong enough to fight alongside them and protect himself from danger. The girl began to show her crazy side, loudly declaring that they could always just leave the healer to die, like last time. There were a lot of applications they had to sort through, but among the pile of letters, Alan received a private one. A request to investigate a dungeon, where a powerful source of magical energy was emanating from a coastal area that had been abandoned for a very, very long time. It seemed getting there wouldn't be too difficult, since it wasn't far from where they were stationed. What really got them interested was the reward, a sum of up to 500,000 gold. Couldn't turn that down, right? A few days later in Dystopia, Licht and Necro were cleaning up in her room when Necro received a warning on Discord from one of her spirits. There were signs of humans approaching the dungeon, exploring the outskirts, and had apparently discovered the newly opened entrance. However, they decided to deal with it when the time was right, because if they attacked now, they would draw unwanted attention from the enemy and could end up in a direct declaration of war. Alan and his companions entered the dungeon, and the plan to eliminate them was set in motion. Stepping into the first room, the adventurers encountered hundreds of spirits freely drifting about, guarding the entrance to Arya's sacred halls. The naive adventurers were stunned by the overwhelming number of spirits, and Alan blurted out, wondering if all of this was the work of a single monster. Jose had never said anything about just one monster. It seemed they were facing 10 Lichts. Or according to the voice that echoed from behind, a vampire. Alan was instantly teleported away from the group, all in the blink of an eye. Now, he stood face to face with Rose, whom he assumed was the master of the dungeon. No, she's far more terrifying than that, he thought. Even if she wasn't Arya, Rose was the opponent right in front of him. "Time to die, you weak human," she said coldly. Alan raised his sword, preparing to strike. But in that very instant, the sword vanished mid-swing. From behind him, Rose held his sword and remarked nonchalantly, "Not bad quality. A shame it's wasted on your kind." She returned the sword by tossing it right back into his hand, her face a mask of utter boredom. But when Alan asked who was controlling the spirits, the unexpected mention of the name Licht left him stunned. The kid he'd seen get stabbed right through the chest. He'd never even considered that the resurrection ability could be used on oneself. Dumber than a bag of rocks. Alan tried to put on a brave face, asking if she thought mentioning a name from his past could possibly rattle him. "Not exactly, my little sunshine," Rose replied. "And for the record, you've already lost." Rose's bats had already bitten and paralyzed Alan. Now they were preparing to do what vampires do best. Rose didn't think she'd get much blood out of him, but then it occurred to her, if Licht just kept reviving these guys, wouldn't she have a never-ending food supply? She decided she'd test that theory later. Instantly, hundreds of bats swarmed Alan, all of them craving the sweet taste of human blood. And unworthy adventurers' pained cries for help echoed throughout Dystopia. Meanwhile, back in the forest, Shizuku was wandering about, trying to figure out where everyone had gone. She stumbled upon Taisei and Iris, who were just about to enter a battle. Pushed to her limit, Shizuku grew overconfident. But then one of Iris's small spirits entered her body, completely paralyzed her, ending the brief fight. At the same time, Jose encountered countless wandering spirits in the deep darkness, lost within the dungeon's labyrinth. Moments later, he came face to face with the lovely Necro. Drawing his sword, Jose prepared to fight for his life as the legendary girl gave nothing away. But what was more surprising was when Licht entered the room. Looking for Dorothy, such a cute-sounding name, Jose was just as stunned as he felt Licht's powerful emotions flooding the entire dungeon. His old teammate asked, full of surprise, "How are you still alive?" He couldn't seem to believe it. since he had personally witnessed Licht's execution. But if Licht was here, that meant Alan had to be around too. Licht was eager to have a chat with Alan, perhaps using a few revivals to teach him a lesson, some kind of power leveling. After all, Alan had no qualms about taking his precious healer for granted. Jose also wanted to know where he was, since the whole party had been separated in an instant. Right, that whole teleportation thing, Licht said with a slight shrug. But then he asked a crucial question as the candlelight in the magic-trapped labyrinth flickered gently. Did Jose know about the execution order the kingdom had issued for him? Jose was silent for a moment, then answered directly. I know. Good, Licht replied. So what's your take on it? A pause, then Jose answered succinctly. Our party won't be as strong as it used to be. That was typical Jose. Everything revolved around power and money. When Jose tried to ask a few more questions, Licht bluntly gave him the middle finger, even revealing that he was the one who had resurrected the demon lord and her entourage. Horrified, Jose immediately asked if Licht really thought he could get away with this once the king found out. The entire army would be mobilized to destroy them, wouldn't it? Let them come. I'm ready, Licht challenged. Jose decided to retreat to the kingdom, believing his comrades were likely dead, to report this act of treason to His Majesty. He was about to use a special item to return to the surface. But just then, two spirits under Dorothy's command attacked him. However, Jose turned the attack into an opportunity, smashing the gem on the floor and teleporting. But instead of arriving on the surface, he was pulled straight into Ferris's room, his teleport redirected by an interference barrier. Instantly, he drew his weapon and attacked Ferris, inflicting multiple wounds. Ferris collapsed, her blood pooling on the floor, but as she fell, her mirror curse activated. The king received a report that all contact had been lost with the adventurer party investigating the special dungeon. If they knew, they would surely have to assume the worst, given the dangerous nature of that place. But the pressing question that needed an answer was, how long until those monsters became a threat to humanity's very existence? Fortunately, the king's trusted aides seemed to already have a plan in mind. It was time to send word to the neighboring countries about the threat from this terrifying dungeon before it was too late. They began urgent preparations for a diplomatic mission, aiming to bring peaceful warnings to those in the greatest danger. Meanwhile, in dystopia, Arya was thinking. The current situation wasn't looking good for them, because she was sick and tired of eating the same food over and over again. The only thing that made the dungeon meals bearable was Tisa's cooking, but that also meant the menu was limited to what Chinu could make with the few remaining ingredients. Iris had tried cooking onesia, and the key word there is tried. But Arya suddenly came up with a solution to this problem, neatly resolving it in her tiny brain. Simply go outside and make friends with the neighboring countries. This would not only secure a new supply of food, but it would also bring in a lot of highly skilled labor, especially since those nations are populated by elves. First off, it would make perfect sense for Licht to recruit Tissi and Iris for this mission, since they're both part of that race. And they're not just elves. Tissi and Iris are high elves, a race considered superior to other elven breeds. While they aren't exactly friendly, a strong opinion from these two could be very helpful in negotiations. If the mission is a success, they'll get more meat and other ingredients for their stockpile, along with the most talented chefs. When Iris pouted, asking why she couldn't cook, everyone simply reassured her it was because Arya was a gourmet. Iris's cooking was unique and wonderful. Yes, a kind of unique that could also be considered poison. Perhaps their only mission was to accompany Licht to the Elven Kingdom and protect him. Nothing too strenuous. Iris seemed excited. And when they reached the surface, they got the shock of their lives. When they saw Fenrir, the giant legendary beast, being kept as a pet. Licht could rest assured that this Fenrir was well-trained and knew who not to attack. Still, no one could be sure if it had ever tasted human flesh, which made them a little less confident. As he sat on Fenrir's back, Licht, the revived boy, admitted that the view was truly breathtaking. The three of them prepared for their first adventure into the wilds of Lance, the land of the elves. Iris was a little sad that they had to leave Fenrir behind. Tissaet was about to say more when she was cut off by a strange sound carried on the wind, swirling through the treetops. It was a sound Lisht couldn't hear, a distant cry for help. The enemy this time appeared to be a giant spider, the kind of predator that, once it starts hunting, no one can easily escape. The two girls immediately rushed into the forest to help, with Licht close behind. Unfortunately, they were a little too late. A little girl lay motionless on the ground, about to become the monster's next meal. But the high elves had no time to waste on such trash. They controlled small spirits, sending them slicing into the spider's body like a hot knife through butter. The giant spider collapsed as if someone had just detonated a dozen sticky bombs on it. The spiders didn't know what hit them. Before long, they were completely wiped out, while Licht had already begun reviving the little girl on the ground. The little girl woke up, stunned to see the massive, dark monster lying dead on its back nearby. Tissaet showed off her special skill, hugging the little girl to comfort her, an act that was sure to make Iris jealous. The little girl bowed her head, thanking the man who had saved her life, expressing her gratitude. The group asked the adorable little girl to lead them to the kingdom. She happily agreed. Her name was Lyrica, and her eyes sparkled, shining as bright as stars. Licht introduced himself and the other two as high elves, and Lyrica couldn't help but marvel at their beauty. The group was led through lush green forests straight to the kingdom they had long been searching for, just as they had hoped. The people here lived among the trees, in harmony with nature. The streets were bustling and full of life, with shade covering everything. However, the three of them still drew many stares, especially the two beautiful twins, causing the nearby elves to be unable to look away, perhaps because high elves were a rare sight, let alone two of them appearing in the same place. Lyrica ran back and announced that the princess was ready to see them. Although the path was a straight and easy one, Lyrica still accompanied them to lead the way. Looking at the majestic trees in the Elven Kingdom, Iris felt a bit envious, wishing she could grow a tree like that in the city of Dystopia. Maybe they should ask Rose if that's even possible. Of course, that might just give the poor girl a crisis. Iris would have to mind her manners in front of the royal princess. Even though she was a high elf, at the end of the day, Iris was still just a little girl. Between Tice and the princess, who would show more respect? It seemed Iris didn't quite understand this yet. So they stood outside and practiced, until the little girl had mastered every word and action she would need. Finally, when they were ready, Lyrica was ready to open the door for the group. The only question now was whether they could forge a good relationship with the princess behind that door. If not, Arya would surely become the only one in the region. With all the risks they were facing, with this kind of mission, they had no choice but to return with a worthwhile result. Stepping into the large room, they saw the princess bowing to them, in the middle of the spacious and open area, offering a humble welcome to the group of three. She apologized for not being able to express her gratitude sooner and for not having figured out a way to repay the heroes who had slain that terrifying giant spider. That monster had been a great danger to them for a long time, and they had no way to defeat it. But it seemed everything was fine now. Then, the princess initiated the negotiations, recognizing that they had come with important matters to discuss with the kingdom. Iris, remembering her role, spoke just as she'd been taught, expressing their desire to borrow the kingdom's most talented individuals in exchange for jewelry and weapons from Dystopia. This was quite fair, as many in the kingdom were also curious about the outside world and willing to take on the task. In return, the Elven Kingdom asked for only one thing: protection from the monsters that often threatened their forest, like the recent giant spider, as the Elven people were not fond of violence. A simple request for warriors like them. And once the deal was sealed, the princess agreed to send some of their children to Dystopia. Wait, children? All right, Thena, and sent her regards to Arya. But wait, How did the princess know Arya's name when it hadn't even been mentioned? Next up was the mission to ally with the Dragon King. To do this, Licht brought Rose along to the desert, an interesting place for a vampire. The two chatted as they flew across the world to their destination. Rose probably needed a little break from work anyway. Actually, the original plan was for him to go alone, but she quickly volunteered to be his escort up. Rose and Licht glided through the sky, supported by a flock of bats. After a long chat, Licht was surprised to learn that Rose was completely unaffected by sunlight, something that wasn't the weakness people thought it was. Finally, they arrived at the Dragon King's village. In the distance, a girl standing by the river suddenly sensed a sinister aura. She turned her head toward the village, all while continuing to scoop something from the water. Her companion asked what was wrong, and she explained that she just felt a sudden surge of malevolent energy. Though it vanished in an instant, for their own safety, they should probably call it a day at the sparkling blue stream and head home, especially since their mother was in critical condition. Would she get any better? Probably not. But they couldn't show any sign of weakness. Meanwhile, the girl's mother had been eating less and less over the past few days, showing no signs of recovering anytime soon. While there were healers in this world, no one had ever heard of one who could actually cure diseases. Meanwhile, Rose and Licht were wandering around, looking for someone to befriend. In truth, it was more of a village than a kingdom, as these dragon folk lived far more scattered lives than humans. They tended to prefer separation and isolation. Rose asked what they should do next and whether infiltration was part of the plan, but Licht shot that down, saying their best bet was to find a low-ranking dragonkin to talk to. Any more than that, and they might turn hostile and attack on sight, ruining any chance of a friendly first impression. Rose spotted two dragonkin up ahead, who had just returned from a fishing trip. Licht was eager to approach, so the two of them started forward under the harsh, unforgiving sun. The two dragonkin didn't seem to be carrying any weapons, and with no one else around to talk to, Licht decided they would start with them. "Good evening," he began, and immediately, Cain, who seemed to be the older brother, was put on guard by the approaching pair. The man was clearly human, but the woman behind him was something else entirely. A dark, plasma-like aura radiated from Rose, putting Cain on high alert and prompting him to bluntly declare that they were not welcome. Before Licht and Rose could be sent away, Licht drew Arya's prized sword, a personal weapon given to him as a bargaining chip. The Dragonkin twins were stunned, deeply impressed by the sword's exquisite craftsmanship, so much so that they began to wonder if Licht might be carrying some kind of medicine that could cure their mother. Rose only had a single clove of garlic on her, and Licht had a brilliant idea: ask what kind of medicine they needed for the pain. When Cain briefly explained his mother's condition, Licht the hero had another flash of inspiration. If he truly possessed the ability to cure illness, this was his chance to prove his worth and earn their trust. Licht quickly drew his familiar magic circle and cast a resurrection spell on the long-dead fish in their basket. Seeing this magic, Lalka, the dragonkin's sister, dropped to her knees, calling Licht their savior, and she led Licht and Rose to their small family home. Inside the hut, 3 other dragonkin were waiting: an elderly woman lying in bed, 2 young men who looked strong yet refined, and a third, silver-haired man whose aged face was etched with sorrow. When the younger ones returned with 2 human strangers, the rest of the family was suspicious. However, when Licht explained that he could perform a healing, the tense atmosphere began to ease. But the question remained: how? The resurrection spell only works on the dead. Rose acted quickly. The old woman on the bed took her last breath. Immediately, Licht cast the resurrection spell, and she was pulled back from the brink of death, filled with life as if nothing had ever happened. She shot up as if from a brief nap in the afterlife, leaving the entire family utterly stunned. It was just like a miracle. The children cheered with joy, and the old mother shed tears of happiness. Finally, Licht had the chance to show everyone the quality weapon they wanted to reproduce. They would provide the raw materials, while the difficult parts would be handled by the best craftsmen. Meanwhile, far from the vast lands of dystopia, on some distant edge, a massive shadow hurtled toward their metal gates, sending sea waves splashing everywhere. A massive explosion shook the very foundations of dystopia, alerting everyone who was still awake to an approaching threat. Downstairs, Dorothy and Licht were conducting a routine check on the spirits, and the upper floors to ensure everything was in top condition. While talking about the dual alliance Licht had just formed, he confessed that helping the Dragon King was a stroke of luck. At least he was self-aware enough to admit it. Despite his best efforts, Arya still seemed to focus her attention on the outside world, with a mood that was both excited and seemingly wanting to dominate the world? Probably not. But anyway, something terrible happened 100 years ago, and perhaps she learned her lesson from that event. Even so, asking her about that past was practically taboo. Dorothy tried to probe once, but Arya just got angry and locked herself in her room all day. Perhaps that mystery is the very reason she wants to strengthen her military power, determined not to repeat the same mistake. Speaking of military matters, it seems the Human King is also hiding a card up his sleeve, an ace that no one knows about. As Licht and Dorothy walked down the hall, they were greeted by Rose, who informed them that Arya had summoned the group to the throne room for a meeting about the East. The Demon Lord has started to become aggressive, and the situation could get ugly. Downstairs, the group found Arya on her throne, clearly annoyed. The room was silent, everyone looking at each other cautiously, unsure of what to do next. In the midst of the tense atmosphere, fairies broke the silence, saying they had been worried about her. Finally, Queen Arya spoke. She once thought that their demon race should join forces to fight against the evil that humanity had inflicted upon the world, a common enemy that everyone, even some demons, hated from the bottom of their hearts. But what was the Demon Lord's response? He answered by hurling a spell from his castle straight at Dystopia's gates in the middle of the night. "If you want to fight, then bring it on," Licht retorted. After exchanging information, the group realized that the Demon Lord Garga was clearly not happy about his predecessor's return, and he was determined to find a way to destroy her. To prepare for battle, Arya paired Licht with herself and began to plan, while the other members were assigned their tasks. Rose, on the other hand, wanted to charge in like a daredevil, but the more logical theory was that they needed to avoid a direct confrontation with Garga's forces due to their overwhelming power. Instead, the group would take a risk, combining Dorothy's spirits and the elf girl's spirit beast to act as the vanguard. Rose would use her ability to transform into a swarm of bats to get past their defenses and gather information from the inside. Soon after, Licht and fairies left the Demon King's castle with several small vanguards tailing them, likely for surveillance. A giant creature with long horns and a jaw as sharp as a knife slashed at them with its razor-sharp claws, sending an entire ancient tree flying. One of Iris's spirit beasts, with short hair like a demo character from TF2, entered the monstrous creature's body, and in just a moment, the creature let out a deathly roar. The demon army was truly a formidable force, stronger than anything humanity could ever hope to deal with. If it weren't for the guardian spirit beasts, the group would have surely been in deep trouble. Currently, the demon army occupied 70% of the world's land, including the eastern region where they now stood. The Demon King's castle loomed ominously on the horizon, standing out against the barren trees and sparse forest, looking as if it were carved into the mountain itself, majestic and terrifying. Many adventurers had tried to explore this area, but as you might have guessed, none returned. Thanks to Dorothy's diversionary tactics using her ability to control legions of spirits, the group now had a chance to enter the demon castle and gather information, ready to report back to Arya. Then, Lady Karma decided to strike a vicious blow. Fairies was pierced through the chest from somewhere in the distant castle, the blow hitting both her heart and throat. Assuming that the attacker had also been taken down in the process, Licht scanned the surroundings for any other signs of danger. And when he saw nothing, he immediately revived fairies. Upon waking up, fairies started adding the word nano to every sentence she spoke, dropping her previous desu suffix. The two of them stepped out into a clearing, and although the attacks had temporarily stopped, the enemy seemed to be confused about what had just happened, since one of their own had been taken down. From a distance, Licht figured that the enemy might have used their power too soon, accidentally revealing a trump card. If they figured out Ferris's grudge skill, it would be an easily countered weakness. As long as they didn't kill Ferris, everything would be fine from here on out. Ferris was told to stay as close to Licht as possible. If he could deliberately protect her, the chance to deceive the enemy was still there. Of course, Licht didn't realize he was being a little intimate by saying that, but he was completely oblivious to the situation. Meanwhile, Licht's judgment turned out to be spot on. The sniper who had killed Ferris died in the exact same way, making their leadership even more unstable. They began to think that perhaps an enemy had infiltrated their ranks, because the way the girl died was so strange. In the room, there were no traces of a murder, no signs of a break-in, or anything of the sort. This girl was high-ranking in the army, so she wouldn't go down easily without a fight. They quickly realized that the female sniper had died in the same way as her target. Something was clearly wrong. The girl who found Sniper Girl immediately reported the situation to the Demon King. While Lion Commander Dover was busy schooling the intruders, after he was finished, he planned to hold a meeting about their next steps and bring out the grudge sword to deal with this group. Meanwhile, Licht assumed they had successfully breached the enemy's defenses. But just as he thought that, Commander Dover appeared before them, accompanied by two elf children, one carrying a bow and the other a sword. The elf children didn't seem to be slaves, but Dover immediately swung the grudge sword and slashed at Licht, while the two children began to approach Ferris. An arrow pierced her chest, and the other boy attacked, cutting into her, killing her instantly. A clear demonstration of Ferris's ability to resurrect. Even though Dover had witnessed her power, he couldn't hold out much longer, as blood began to stream from his eyes. It was because Iris's spirit beasts were carrying out their duty. At last, the Demon King sensed the presence of the intruders. The Eastern Demon King, Garga, was bored out of his mind. He had no desire to rule the world, simply because maintaining power on that scale was too exhausting and brought no joy. For him, tormenting the weak held no thrill, and the lone adventurers who came to challenge him only deepened his boredom. But then, a letter from Arya changed everything. She proposed a large-scale alliance against humanity, their sworn enemy. Instead of a formal reply, Garga launched a magical attack across the country, straight to the gates of dystopia, just to see what would happen. If she truly had the potential to be an interesting playmate, Garga was willing to give it a shot. In response to his move, Arya sent back an equally powerful magical blast, along with a formal declaration of him as an immediate enemy. For Garga, an ideal opponent like Arya came along only once a century, and she even knew his exact location. But when the girl reporting to him asked what if the Demon King he had just provoked turned out to be the one sealed 100 years ago, and whether he stood a chance of winning, Garga immediately dismissed it as absurd, because that entity had been banished to the depths of the earth. Speaking of the fight, Garga advised the girl to hide if she didn't want to die. She refused, choosing to stay and fight by his side. But the question was, what could she really do? The girl just stood there, silent and confused, torn between obeying him and running away, or staying and defying his order. Her decision to stay cost her dearly as Rose's swarm of bats descended, attacking her so fast the Demon King didn't even have time to blink. The girl approached Garga, her eyes vacant but her expression filled with sorrow, and he suddenly realized she was his former kind servant. To free her from her pain, he granted her a merciful death. Rose immediately spoke up, accusing him of being cruel. However, it was hard to say Rose had any right to condemn him, since she was the one who caused the chaos in the first place. Garga wanted to ignore Rose's presence to fight Arya, but he had some time to kill with the opponent before him. He smirked, thinking that Rose knew nothing about her master's true nature. "How dare you!" she screamed, but her words only made everything clearer in his mind. He read her like an open book, forcing Rose to constantly retreat and attack. However, every one of her attacks missed. Once he was close enough, Garga gently swept his foot behind Rose's heel, causing her to stumble onto the cold floor. He calmly told her she should use her full power immediately, as he needed a worthy battle. He didn't enjoy torturing the weak, and this frail human form of hers showed none of her true strength. "If you don't go all out, you'll die as a useless weakling, disappointing me for such a petty and pathetic reason." Hearing this, Rose stood up, her voice as cold as ice. "Fine, you win." And then she transformed into a giant half-wolf, half-bat creature, and in that moment, Garga could no longer read her thoughts. She was acting on pure instinct, but his overwhelming strength was enough to push Rose to her limit. He sliced off one of her arms, but she managed to strike back, severing one of his own, before her jaw was crushed, and a hole was punched through her chest, ending the battle. Garga had to admit that, for a brief moment, she had been a troublesome opponent. On the stone floor, Rose's quartz crystal lay still, surrounded by messy bloodstains, a testament to what she had just endured. But then, a familiar voice echoed from behind him. "Looks like you're having fun, aren't you?" When Garga turned, Arya appeared in all her adorable yet murderous glory, ready to tear him to pieces. She seemed to have appeared from thin air, but she had actually been watching the fight ever since he started courting Rose. Even the mighty demon lord of old couldn't resist the tension between them, so Arya had kept quiet and simply observed. Now Garga had to make do with his one remaining arm. Although he was a bit curious about Arya's power, he was able to read her name and grasp her thoughts through a bit of telepathy, realizing she still held a clear grudge over the attack on Dystopia. He thought to himself, she should really relax a little, an idea that seemed to both surprise and annoy Arya. Garga was lost in his own inscrutable thoughts, but Arya coldly mentioned that he should quietly heal his arm with magic before considering another attack. Arya, knowing full well that Garga could regenerate, wasn't surprised at all. "There's no way a guy like you would lack healing magic," she thought. Despite her bloodlust, she wasn't so cruel as to strike a weakened opponent while they were recovering. The moment he recovered, Garga raised his blade, bringing its full weight down to split Arya in two. But with a flash in her eyes and a terrifying calm, Arya used her spatial manipulation, slowing everything down to the point where she could dodge the blow with a simple sidestep. Garga was as shocked as someone hearing about Raid, Shadow Legends, for the first time. Garga quickly realized something was very wrong. A sticky feeling, like honey, clung to his limbs, making his movements slow and heavy. Arya completely owned this room with her ability to manipulate space. To emphasize her dominance, she effortlessly severed his finger without a second thought. The intent wasn't even clear, yet the attack was already over. Garga couldn't counter, nor could he dodge, simply because he could never have anticipated Arya's attack. Attempting a counterattack, he threw daggers toward her eyes. But Arya simply tilted her head and let them fly harmlessly past her shoulder. With impossibly precise reflexes, Arya proved that she was in complete control of the space, making everything in the room seem to move in slow motion, while she alone maintained her natural speed. To have a fighting chance, Garga needed to escape this space and take the battle outside, where Arya would be forced to face him head-on. But that was nearly impossible. The moment he turned his back, she would strike him down instantly. The only way was to kill her right here, but in this state, that was beyond anyone's capabilities. Knowing that Licht and fairies were about to arrive, Arya decided to end this little game before they appeared. She didn't want Garga reading their minds. When Licht and fairies entered, they found Arya standing beside a fallen Rose. With a slight nod from Arya, Licht began to revive Rose, and upon waking, a confused Rose asked, "Where is the Eastern Demon Lord?" Arya, with the gentle tenderness of a mother, joyfully embraced Rose, happy to see her old friend alive after the battle. With their first victory against a true enemy, Arya announced she would host a celebratory feast that evening to commemorate the victory in the short-lived war. Meanwhile, in the human kingdom, tensions were rising as requests for aid from both the elves and the Dragon King went unanswered. The only option anyone could think of was to contact the kingdom of Rathta to seek reinforcements from the last remaining human kingdom. After some time had passed, Arya suddenly asked Licht if he would like to go to the human world with her. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Arya smiled, explaining that she knew a very interesting place in the human world and wanted to know if he'd like to go exploring with her. If that were all, he would have agreed in a heartbeat, except it was the very place he once had to flee. However, Arya reassured him that no, she didn't intend to go there. Her destination was the kingdom of Rathta. The name rang a faint bell for Licht. He had tried to approach adventurers from there many times, but all his attempts had failed. There were many rumors and whispers about the exceptional warriors in this kingdom, but detailed information was incredibly scarce and hard to find. So what had drawn Arya's attention to that place? It was, indeed, a nation of humans. But her tone sounded a bit uncertain. Licht sensed she was implying that there was something strange about the country. Was it crawling with monsters? Close, but not quite, Arya replied, in an old-fashioned manner of speaking that took even Licht by surprise. The people there are all human, but their queen is a demoness. Remarkably, this queen didn't rule the country with brute force, but lived like a normal human, enjoying her everyday life. A demoness who had adapted to life among humans, and that was what had captured Arya's attention. What's more, this queen was no ordinary demon lord. The moment Licht grasped the situation, Arya grabbed his arm, and the two of them set off immediately. She shot up into the sky, flying as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Rathta, Queen Byrne was handling some of her courtly duties, while her maid Anna was completely captivated by the queen's natural beauty and charisma. Afterwards, Byrne retired to her private chambers to rest and recharge her energy. As soon as she was alone, she practically collapsed onto her bed, letting go and releasing all her pent-up stress. Her arms and legs stretched out as if casting off a heavy burden. All Byrne wanted was to live peacefully among humans, not to bear responsibility for them. But in the blink of an eye, everything changed when Arya and Licht appeared right behind her, as if from thin air. She immediately threatened to call the guards, but Arya revealed that she was also a demon. How did she know? Arya's blazing eyes and overwhelming presence said it all. Enough to force Byrne to transform into a kitsune. However, Byrne still refused to believe Arya's story that she was the great demon king. Byrne scoffed. "You expect me to believe such a blatant lie?" Immediately, Arya snapped her fingers after a brief warning, and Licht exploded right next to her. Byrne was completely stunned. As she watched Licht collapse, his body falling without a twitch. But just a few seconds later, Licht's revival skill activated, and he shot back up, resurrected from the brink of death. That was more than enough to convince the cute kitsune. Combined with Arya's cold killing intent and intense magical pressure, it proved that killing a human was as simple as snapping her fingers. Arya was truly on a completely different level, far beyond anything that exists today. Anna knocked on the door, curious about the noise, but was gently reassured by Byrne that there was nothing to worry about. Afterward, Byrne explained that all she wanted was a peaceful life among humans, but had unexpectedly become their queen for some strange reason. Arya was confused whether she was smart or foolish, and that was really something, coming from someone who was only about the size of a rolling suitcase. In the end, Byrne was promised eternal beauty and the ability to resurrect, a form of immortality, in exchange for her absolute loyalty. After some sweet moments with Anna, which included brushing her hair, and some cute noises from the monsters, a few days later, a friendly relationship was established. Around this time, an envoy from another human nation arrived, wishing to meet Queen Byrne. She had previously refused invitations from other countries to avoid her demon identity being discovered and exploited. But now, It seemed the time had come for her to act. The reason the envoy came was because other humans had learned about dystopia and wanted to negotiate for support from it and its high-ranking adventurer groups. However, since Byrne had sided with Arya, this made the other human nation a rival power she could not ignore. When Byrne asked her aid for his opinion, he suggested that instead of refusing outright, they should hear them out. Cooperating to conquer the dungeon could be a wise strategy, as it could become a threat if ignored. Furthermore, gathering all the adventurers from the rival nation for a meeting with Arya would also be beneficial, and might even impress the Demon King more with Byrne. Therefore, Byrne decided to meet with the envoy first to get a better grasp of the situation. Anna was a little worried for her mistress's safety in this, meeting a high-ranking adventurer over a mere invitation. "Don't worry, kid," Byrne reassured her. Just because she was a woman didn't mean she was weak. Byrne's plan was to seize the opportunity, lead the enemy straight to the threshold of destruction, and deal with them all in one fell swoop. When she met the envoy, she came face to face with a man who had a large scar running from left to right across his face, an S-rank adventurer. He expressed his honor at being able to meet the kingdom's rarely seen queen, although it was, in fact, a queendom. The man frankly shared that they had previously tried to sweep the target dungeon to determine its danger level, but the expedition team sent inside never returned. If she understood his meaning, he had a feeling that if this place was left alone, it could become a threat to the entire world given enough time to prepare. This dungeon was infamous in the adventurer community as a hazard you wouldn't touch with a 40-foot pole. What worried him most was the sheer number of powerful forces they had sent in, including 3 S-rank adventurers, yet none had returned. This hinted that it might be the lair of a demon lord, for anyone sharp enough to spot the signs. And to make matters worse, there had recently been a disturbance at the Eastern Demon Lord's castle. Impressive how he grasped nearly the entire situation with just a single glance. We're given a little tidbit about the hidden treasure the kingdom of Rasaga possesses. A sword whose sharpness increases with the damage its wielder takes. Is that their trump card? You'd die a miserable death using that as your ultimate weapon. The frustrated man slammed his head on the table. Queen Byrne, ever the diplomat, politely ignored his strange behavior. So, when would they be entering this mysterious dungeon? According to him, everything was ready on Rasaga's end, so they were just waiting for her decision. How convenient. Byrne flat out lied, saying she needed more time to inform the Adventurers Guild before they could act. In reality, she would use that time to report to Arya-sama. He cheerfully promised to bring back good news from the mission, completely oblivious to what he was about to face. In the deep floors of dystopia, Lick dropped by to visit Dorothy, sharing some fruit that Iris and Tissa had given him as a gift. Dorothy happily enjoyed it with him, since neither of them could finish the whole bowl alone. They sat together, enjoying the fruit and chatting. Licht and Dorothy chatted about how peaceful things had become, and how there really wasn't much to do anymore. They could just sit back and relax as everything was running smoothly. Honestly, it was nice to enjoy a bit of quiet like this. Constant fighting can wear anyone out. However, if they rested for too long, the work would all pile up on Rose, making it hard for her to handle her own duties. Even though Rose's stamina was far superior to a human's, she still had her limits. Dorothy had offered to help ease her burden, but Rose adamantly refused, insisting that she was a big girl and could handle it herself. After a heartwarming chat between Dorothy and Licht, which would probably put us to sleep if we listened for too long, the door suddenly burst open, and Arya appeared, looking extremely excited. She announced that the time had come. Humanity was about to launch an attack on dystopia, and things were about to get extremely hot in the blink of an eye. Lick could only think of one logical reason, given the Rasaka Kingdom's current situation, and that reason was nothing short of a suicide mission. Arya confirmed that this was an all-out assault, gathering humanity's most elite forces with the goal of wiping everything out and sending any survivors to the netherworld. If they were really that determined, then dystopia must be a much greater threat than anyone imagined. It wouldn't be surprising if they found out who had been buried here by their legendary hero. Byrne had reported the upcoming attack and revealed that Rasaga was trying to build good relations to gain crucial support for this campaign. Licht, no matter how hard he tried, couldn't shake the dark memories of his former country, a place whose people he no longer even considered human after what they had done. However, Byrne hadn't gathered any useful information beyond confirming their movements, with no specific data on their strength or troop numbers. After some thought, Arya turned to Licht, hoping he might have something they could use against his old kingdom. When he shook his head, Arya immediately turned her gaze to Dorothy, seemingly forgetting that dystopia had been cut off from the human world for over a century. Well, with the situation this tense, if there were any tactics they wanted to try, now was the perfect time to deploy them. Arya left the preparations to them and decided to get some rest, so she would be fresh for the upcoming battle. They gathered the troops, starting at the Batcave, where Rose was waiting. After a few formalities and some coffee was passed around, they got straight to the point. The plan was quite simple. Tissaia and Iris would continue to handle the enemy mobs as usual, while Rose would take direct orders from Arya and tear through the battlefield with the goal of destroying anything that wasn't an ally. Fairies would team up with Licht, which made Dorothy a little jealous. The flowers of love were starting to bloom among the members. With the strategy decided, Iris was left to rest and recover her strength, only to be woken up by her elf big sister as they prepared to enter the battlefield. It seems the battle has begun. Rose is single-handedly holding the entrance to dystopia, an incredible feat as a flood of humans pours onto the battlefield. This means the group's best option is to flank them and clean up any stragglers. Meanwhile, Iris secretly adds a madness effect to her spirit beasts, causing anyone who gets near the entrance to go berserk, like wild animals, creating a bloody vortex at the entrance. One of her spirit beasts was taken down, proving that a highly skilled warrior is present on the front lines. Radiating a murderous aura and the heat of destruction, people began to attack each other, cutting down anyone in their path, while Rose crushed all resistance, causing the humans to call her a monster. One of the crazed men staggered towards his nearest comrade, his sword raised high, aiming to pierce through his opponent's shield with a violent scream. But instead of succeeding, he took a powerful kick to the stomach. He must have been infected by a vampire. But his condition seemed completely different. No one had ever heard of a monsterized human becoming so aggressive after being turned. But that was hard to deny when he was trying to tear you to pieces. He stabbed his former friend right in the chest, then decapitated him, leaving a small orb of light to rise from the corpse. Just then, Rose appeared behind the killer. He immediately attacked her, trying to hold Rose off until reinforcements could arrive. At least, that's what Rose initially thought. But no support appeared. His reaction said it all. He tried to act like a true hero, keeping Rose locked in this battle, but that didn't last long, as she easily pierced through his armor. His wide, terrified eyes stared at Rose as life slowly drained from his body. The man knelt as life faded from his face, the color draining away. Not that he had much color to begin with. The last thing he saw was the sharp vampiress, looking down at him with a hint of pity. As Licht predicted, some enemies had broken into his corridor and were charging without hesitation through the dim light and the taste of darkness. It was time to face them head-on and try to score a victory. But could Licht face them in an even fight? Licht, being a former S-rank adventurer, could win without hesitation, as long as his opponents were just ordinary humans. But this time, the one he had to face was no ordinary man. It was Guy, another S-rank adventurer. In a one-on-one fight, Guy was a real challenge, much harder to take down than anyone else. Strangely enough, Licht almost hoped Guy would target fairies first. Guy was legendary, not just because he was among the current top S ranks, but also because he was King Rasaga's right-hand man, an honorary title given to only 3 people in the nation's entire history. Compared to him, every other opponent was like a minnow next to a shark, like a horror character from a manhwa. Fairies was ordered to do her duty, and she nodded, beginning to approach Guy without a weapon or any show of hostility. Would he not attack the girl because of some old-fashioned knightly spirit? But without missing a beat, Fairies pulled a small knife from her leg strap and lunged, pretending to stab Guy in the heart, to distract him and steal his weapon. However, Guy wasn't easily fooled by such a simple trick. In a flash, he pinned her to the floor, his sword drawn and ready. Guy looked disappointed, thinking she was weaker than he'd expected. After finishing with Fairies, he turned to his next target, Licht. Guy tried to remain polite, asking about their plan of action, but only received a cold stare from Licht, whom he recognized from somewhere in his past. Licht tried the same old trick to escape, but Guy easily saw through it and quickly tied him up next to Fairies. Guy stabbed Licht in the shoulder, demanding to know why his face was so familiar. But Licht cleverly pretended to pass out from the pain. When Guy realized Licht was faking, he immediately turned to Fairies, the girl who hadn't said a single word since being captured. Guy thought Fairies would be willing to answer his questions to avoid pain, but she didn't respond at all. That's when something terrifying happened. He realized she might have completely lost her mind from the stress. Guy grabbed her bangs and lifted her head, looking straight into Fairies' eyes, but the sight left a horrifying impression. Her gaze held a hatred, as if from cursed souls, making him feel like he should let her go if he wanted to live. A chill ran down his spine, making Guy let go of her before he dared to do anything more to the frightening young girl. The door burst open and Rose stormed in. Seeing her friend's predicament, instantly, the vampire took down the S-rank adventurer with a single kick, unleashing an electric shock that knocked him out cold. Afterward, Rose was asked to untie Licht and Fairies. As she did, she teared up like a child, crying and apologizing for being late and for Licht getting hurt. Once they were all untied, Fairy said she couldn't be of much help in that situation. But in reality, Licht hadn't been much different. The 2 girls carefully examined the wound on Licht's shoulder, worried it might get infected. Rose decided to carry him on her back, and the group headed to Ferris's room to treat him. Meanwhile, Rose's bats reported that all traces of the human intruders had completely vanished. The reason was quite simple. They had awakened Arya. Arya was wandering through a hallway filled with corpses, stepping among those who had paid the price for their recklessness. After returning to her room without any trouble, Arya received a report of victory from Iris and Tisei. She decided to reward everyone with a few days of rest after the battle with humanity. Finally, everyone could relax and de-stress from the recent battle. Rose suddenly confessed to Licht that she planned to use her days off to visit her mom and dad, something no one ever expected to hear from her. But could they possibly still be alive after a century? According to Rose, with a vampire's lifespan, 100 years is just a short while. So unless something major happens, they'll still be there. Surprisingly, Rose even invited Licht to come along. She wanted him to come, partly for protection with his revival ability in case anything went wrong, but more importantly, she wanted to introduce him to her parents as the one who saved her life. Perhaps it's a tradition in Japan. Licht agreed, though he was a bit worried about whether her parents would be scary, slightly eccentric characters. But Rose reassured him, no, they're very kind and always welcoming to those who help our family. Anyone who's a friend of their daughter is like family to them. And one more thing, Dorothy the necromancer would be coming along too. They would depart the next morning, so now is the time to rest for the long journey. While flying high, the group started to chat, with Dorothy kicking things off with a story from Rose's past. It turns out, Rose used to be a crybaby when she was little, while Dorothy was the complete opposite. Her teacher made her cry every day. But through that, she learned how to become strong. Dorothy shared that she had to have a stomach of steel to handle the number of undead that came with the title of legendary necromancer. However, the story of her death was actually a lie. She wasn't killed by a beast, but was assassinated by 5 people while she slept. Rose quickly changed the subject to favor animals. According to her, birds and dogs are the goodest boys of the animal kingdom. In a way, Rose is also like a dog, always loyal and loves being praised by her master, Arya. As for Dorothy, she's like a cat, which makes perfect sense. When they arrived at Rose's family home, the group realized her family was quite wealthy. Rose is a respectable young lady, it turns out. Lady Connor was also surprised, asking who was that person strolling around in such splendid attire. Rose pushed the door open and walked in as if she owned the place, which in fact she did. The servants happily welcomed her and announced her arrival. Rose asked to be taken to her parents, and her wish was quickly granted. Dorothy and List clearly stood out in this formal environment, and they were escorted into the room. Rose's father immediately showed himself to be the slightly eccentric type, while her mother, from whom she inherited her beauty, they embraced their daughter with love. Rose's father immediately ordered the chef to prepare her favorite dishes for a welcome home feast. Rose introduced Licht and Dorothy as her companions. But her parents completely misunderstood. After moving everyone into the dining room, where a table full of food was already laid out, Licht and Dorothy wondered if they should offer to help with anything. Until Rose's father, Mr. Arius, asked Licht to introduce himself. Mr. Arius and his wife, Mrs. Camilla, began to ask about Rose's behavior at work, hoping she wasn't causing any trouble. Licht, choosing his words very carefully, spoke of Rose in a much more positive light than they'd expected, making the atmosphere all the warmer. Afterward, her parents asked the million-dollar question. Why had Rose been away from home for the past 100 years? Well, it's a bit difficult to visit home when you've been murdered. They didn't dwell on that, however, since she was clearly sitting right there, healthy and full of life. Rose's father, after a moment of contemplation, promptly concluded that whoever killed Rose would meet a painful end. As for Licht, who had brought their daughter back, he would be rewarded handsomely. But he needed more time to think on that. For the time being, the family enjoyed the delicious, well-prepared meal. Arius led Licht into his private study and shared that he was completely stunned to learn his daughter's story, as well as how Licht had revived the great demon king Arya. Licht then posed an interesting question. How did Rose meet Arya in the first place? Typically, vampires and demons don't get along. Arius nodded, explaining that when Rose was a child, a group of vampire hunters had once surrounded their family, determined to kill the bloodsuckers. At the time, he and his wife tried to protect their daughter at all costs, but the hunters specifically targeted Rose. Their plan was that if they could eliminate the little girl, her parents' rage would make them predictable and easier to handle. After Arya appeared, she targeted only the hunters, quickly dispatching all of them while leaving Rose's family untouched. It was all over in the blink of an eye. Despite demons and vampires being mortal enemies, that didn't matter to Rose. It now made more sense why she was so loyal to Arya, especially given the warmth and affection she'd received from the great demon king after the battle with Garga. But Arius had another question on the tip of his tongue. Why would a human like you revive the sworn enemy of your own species? Licht paused for a moment before admitting bluntly, I want revenge on the human race. He hadn't told Arya this, but it was his ultimate goal, and no one could stop him from achieving it. The older man was grateful that Licht wasn't keeping any secrets from him, and was about to say something else. Suddenly, a voice from behind asked what her father was up to. It was Rose, who had appeared in a simple nightgown, making her look unexpectedly sweet. Later, Dorothy caught up with Licht as he was strolling around the vampire family's castle, forcing her to quicken her pace to keep up. They discussed whether it was all right to step on such magnificent carpets and get them dirty. But Licht pointed out that if they kept worrying about such trivial details, it would quickly become a hassle. The two of them were looking for the library Rose had mentioned, which was part of the family castle. Suddenly, from behind them, a maid's sweet voice called out, asking if Licht required any service. The maid led Licht and Dorothy through the corridors to the library they were looking for, not too far from where they were. As you'd imagine, the place was filled with classic bookshelves. one particular book called Licht's Eye, elaborately decorated with a cover made of dragon leather and a large gem embedded in the center. While Dorothy was busy flipping through the pages of a book, Licht opened a photo album of Rose's childhood. She was so cute as a kid, and she's still just as cute now. They talked a lot about how adorable Rose was when she was little, how everyone would gather around the moment she was put on the floor. The maid, feeling nostalgic, confessed how much she missed her like that. Then the maid suddenly made a somewhat selfish request. She wanted to capture Rose's moments working at Dystopia. Meanwhile, Dorothy had been flipping through the book very quickly. Then she tried a spell on Licht without even bothering to ask for permission. Using long, noodle-like arms that shot out from the floor to bind his legs tightly. How rude! There were many other spells in the book, but the one she was most interested in required a corpse, which wasn't exactly in short supply for them, since resurrection was always an option. The next morning, Rose tried to wake Licht up. As it was already past noon, and it seemed like if she didn't drag him out of bed, he'd sleep all day. But since nothing else was working, she leaned down and gently bit his hand. When a servant brought news during breakfast, the entire mansion was thrown into an uproar. There were intruders. Upon hearing the news, the three of them shot up, all in their everyday clothes, except for Rose. The report said the maids had gone to find three intruders believed to be vampire hunters. It looked like it was going to be a one-on-one fight between them and their pursuers. Licht paused for a moment to think, finally telling Dorothy and Rose that they should join the fight as well. They both nodded, and the three heroes, a vampire, a necromancer, and a magically immortal human, rushed out the door together. In a corner of the mansion, two men were standing, one warily keeping watch for any danger, while ALF, one of the intruders, was asked by a masked man if this was really a good idea. But with the huge reward waiting for them if they could wipe this place out, no one wanted to back down. A girl in their group sarcastically asked Mr. Mask if he was planning on quitting, calling it a disgrace. But in reality, the only disgraceful thing was her own lack of self-preservation. The actual situation was far different from what they'd been told when they looked over the research materials on their target. According to the plan, they were supposed to surround and take down the two vampires living here. In a classic divide-and-conquer move, the group split up to gain a tactical advantage. However, ALF was spotted by one of the maids while he was sneaking a peek around a corner. He quickly pressed a knife to her back, warning that another sound would cost her her life. But that warning didn't stop her. The maid immediately screamed Dorothy's name and was stabbed under the armpit, a serious wound, but not necessarily a fatal one. Instead of screaming in pain, she collapsed instantly. Dorothy appeared at that very moment, grabbing Aelf with the noodle arm magic she had practiced the day before. He broke free and sneered, "Finally showed up, have you, vampire?" But when he saw Dorothy's face, he was taken aback for a second. She was clearly human. He demanded she get on her knees, promising to spare her life if she obeyed. Dorothy, unfazed, summoned a spirit and dodged his knife attack as he landed a vicious kick to her stomach. However, Dorothy remained resolute, countering and kicking the knife from his hand, only to be choked immediately after. Just then, the maid's corpse unexpectedly used his own knife to stab him straight in the neck, taking Alf down. Dorothy slumped onto the cold floor to catch her breath, wondering how the others were faring. Unfortunately, elsewhere, Lean had taken down 3 vampire maids in a row and was about to finish off the 4th, who was trembling in fear. When the maid refused to yield and reveal her master's whereabouts, Lean, growing impatient, described what she planned to do to the poor vampire and raised her sword, revealing her cold-blooded nature. Just then, Licht appeared. Lean turned, surprised to see a human in the vampire castle she was tasked with clearing out. Licht didn't hesitate to ask, "What are you doing here, and why are all the maids behind you dead?" Lean answered bluntly, "Simple, for money. What other reason is there?" But just then, under the power of revival, the 4 maids behind her rose back to life on their own. While Lean was still speaking, they asked in unison if Licht was all right. He simply replied gently, "I can't die." Seeing the people she had just killed rise again, Lean felt a strange sense of dread. Lick told the girls to run and find Rose and Dorothy for safety. They wished him luck and immediately fled, while Lean turned back, a malicious smile on her face, raising her sword into a ready stance. Though he appeared brave facing Lean, it wasn't to act tough, but because he never wanted to see those girls die in the first place. Lean, with a cruel look in her eyes, asked the question that puzzled her. Why would a human hero side with vampires? It was a crime no less than treason. Licht raised his sword defensively, beads of sweat forming as he faced the wicked woman. Lean lunged forward, her sword flashing with clear intent. She admitted he wasn't bad, even skilled. "If you'd stayed in the human world, you could have made a fortune," she sneered. Licht only replied with a cold stare, reminding her that if he had stayed in the human world, he would have been burned alive 1,000 times over like the Salem witches. Licht took the compliment, but Lean quickly realized he might have nowhere to return to. In that case, she'd give him a place to stay. The underworld. Lean stabbed Licht straight through the heart and tore through his organs. At first glance, it was a certain death. But Licht rose once more, refusing to yield. In response, Licht struck Lean's arm, leaving a deep gash that made her unable to hold her sword steady. Realizing that if he could regenerate forever, she would never win, she began to wonder desperately if there was any way to end Licht's immortality. Lean called Licht a monster and charged at him again, killing him over and over. But finally, realizing Licht's impossible regenerative ability, she stabbed him one more time and quickly retreated. But Licht rose again, his cold voice echoing, "So, there are 2 more, huh?" Meanwhile, we cut to the group's ace, stealthily moving between the pillars with a strong premonition that something was terribly wrong. He thought to himself, they should have been more careful before coming in here. Something felt wrong. Not a single enemy had appeared before him. He'd always figured vampires weren't smart enough to lay traps. But now, he was starting to realize the truth. The sheer size of this castle suggested they were far more intelligent than he'd imagined. And of course, underestimating your opponent only leads to disaster. In this case, breaking into a private castle meant he was about to come face to face with the young lady of the family, who had just returned for a vacation. It was time to say his prayers, because from this point on, he had no chance of getting out of here. Rose materialized from a swarm of bats that coalesced into a human form, thanking the intruder for attacking one of her bats, which had allowed her to instantly pinpoint his location. He then remarked that Rose was an interesting vampire and even asked if she was a child. A big mistake. Ignoring his attempt to provoke her, Rose asked if the knife he'd used to stab the bat was poisoned, as she felt an unpleasant stinging sensation deep inside her body. He admitted that yes, the knife was poisoned. What a relief! Rose was relieved to realize there was nothing unusual happening to her body. However, she also remarked that the poison was minuscule and weak. Nothing like what a real professional would use. He scorned her fighting style, but that didn't faze her. Rose continued, "If I defeat you, will that stop other hunters from gathering at this castle and threatening my parents?" He replied, "Not at all. It would only mark you as a more serious threat." Rose let out a scornful laugh. Typical humans. But to her, it didn't matter, because he would soon be defeated by her anyway. He taunted that Rose's words were all talk, with no real power to back them up. To Rose, however, he wasn't showing any openings. She wanted to see Dorothy and Licht again soon, so she suggested he hurry up and get this over with. The man, Musk, boasted that his comrades had already captured Rose's 2 friends, and she had no way of knowing if this was true or not. Rose couldn't tell he was bluffing, so when she quickly closed in on him and bit his arm, doing her vampire thing, he seized the opportunity, tricking her into turning away to look for her friends. However, Rose transformed and flew away just before he could stab her in the back. Before leaving, she coldly told him to stay put and die, causing the shocked man to stab himself with his own sword. Afterward, Rose quickly found Licht, who was still safe. The 2 of them flew off together to find Dorothy, who was sitting on the floor with red marks around her neck and her dress stained with blood. Licht used his revival ability to save the maid, and for the time being, everyone was safe. As Dorothy prepared to send her spirits after the fugitive, a terrifying presence enveloped the entire castle, carrying a horrifying killing intent. Rose immediately recognized it as her father, which utterly terrified Dorothy, so much so that she later felt nauseous just from the memory of his aura. We learned that Rose's father had encountered the vampire hunter and handled things in a very vampiric way. Meanwhile, Rose's parents dismissed Licht's self-deprecating words, telling him not to worry about it. Licht and Dorothy left the family alone for a while, so Rose could spend her last few moments with her parents, but Rose's father couldn't pass up the chance to tease her, suggesting that Licht seemed like a suitable match for her. He even added that the young man probably had feelings for Rose too. When the clock struck the hour, it was time for the three of them to return to Dystopia. Rose promised that she would come back to visit her family again someday. Rose ran out to meet her friends at the door. They returned to Dystopia without any trouble. And afterwards, the two girls said goodbye to Licht as they all went their separate ways. He first went to his room, where little fairies, dressed in her sleepwear, had diligently cleaned everything while he was away. She probably should have cleaned her own room first, but that was a thought for another time. "How was your day off, Nana?" she asked in her usual adorable way. Licht smiled, telling her that his day off was great and that he even got to meet Rose's parents. In Dystopia, it seemed like nothing important was happening, which made him a little sad. Who was really having a relaxing day off here? Oh, by the way, fairies mentioned that Arya had been looking for Licht recently. Why would someone look for a person on their day off? Anyway, they shouldn't keep the big boss waiting, so they went to find Arya in Dystopia together. Fortunately, Arya seemed to be in a pretty relaxed mood this time. But before fairies could even finish her second sentence, Arya appeared behind Licht and fairies, checking to see if he was okay. Fairies was right. Licht did seem a little sad, a sadness born from the wound of being betrayed by his fellow humans. Arya saw right through it and gave him some time off. Licht's problem was clear. His skills were accepted here, yet he was cast out by his own people. Before long, fairies and Arya returned, informing Licht that there was a new mission for him. Byrne, the queen of the Rasaga kingdom, had requested bodyguards from Dystopia, as a talented assassin was targeting her. Arya explained that the human territories were in chaos, and the queen of the Rasaga kingdom was an assassination target. Therefore, it was highly likely the entire kingdom would fall into chaos if their queen were to be assassinated. This mission wasn't just about protecting the queen, but also about protecting her kingdom. Arya couldn't entrust this to anyone else, because if the worst were to happen, only Licht, with his ability to resurrect, could ensure her safety. Arya had complete faith in Licht when he said he would do his best. Arya appeared in a new outfit, one that was both sharp and mysterious. Surprised by the outfit, Licht told her to wait a few minutes before they left. He even wondered where on earth Arya had gotten those clothes. They felt she was a bit too confident in this new style. She explained it was because of a fortune-telling. Arya looked skeptical. Licht, who was more knowledgeable about the kitsune, explained to his boss that some kitsune truly have the ability to foresee the future based on their spiritual powers. Arya sighed, forced to consider the possibility, and agreed to formulate a protection plan. On her orders, Byrne would be temporarily confined to this room and would not be allowed to leave until the situation was secure. Arya wasn't worried about being assassinated herself, since Licht was there to protect and resurrect her. However, mortals couldn't be allowed to witness such a thing. The problem of governing the kingdom was also solved, with Anna being appointed as the queen's personal messenger to maintain contact with the outside world, while Licht would be tasked with protecting Byrne at all times, except for private moments like using the bathroom. With everything settled, Arya decided it was the perfect time for a nap. Byrne, from inside the room, explained the situation to Anna, who was still frightened and confused. The girl listened, asking if her mistress was really all right with this. Byrne reassured her that everything would be fine, and she just needed to relax for a few days. and if anything were to happen, Anna would be notified immediately through the door, if not by words, then by a scream. For now, Anna was the only person Byrne truly trusted. Besides the two sitting behind her, Arya and Licht, neither of whom looked entirely comfortable. Arya bluntly asked if it was really a good idea to trust a girl as seemingly chatty as Anna. Her gut told her the kid could ruin everything at any moment. However, Byrne assured them that Anna was a good person and would do what was needed when the time came. It was also surprising that Byrne could be locked in her room for 3 days without any major impact on the kingdom. It seemed everyone placed a great deal of trust in her. In any case, Byrne could still communicate through the door's screen, which helped block prying eyes. Meanwhile, the nobles and politicians were busy handling the crisis related to the adventurers. Arya, true to her lazy nature, decided to go back to bed since there was nothing that really needed doing, or play some card games, which would get boring fast. Byrne and Licht weren't sure what to do either. So the queen began to marvel at Licht's resurrection ability. Indeed, the ability to never die could have its drawbacks. For instance, what would happen if Licht died of old age? Would the resurrection spell automatically res him back? Byrne also had some specific questions. How long after death could someone be resurrected? In Arya's case, it had been at least 100 years, and there was no limit to how many times it could be used. What a broken skill. However, there was one limitation. Licht couldn't resurrect someone from a distance. He needed to be in the same physical space as them, at least as far as he knew. He had never actually tested the skill's range limit. Would it even work on Dorothy's spirits? As the sky began to fill with starsaw, Byrne didn't realize how long they had been talking, and it seemed Licht was having a good time discussing how magic works. But now, the queen was starting to feel a little anxious. This was usually the time of night she would take a warm bath just outside her room. However, on Arya's orders, no one was allowed in or out until the 3-day period had passed. Licht, gently trying to wake his boss from her terrifying dreams of a joyful massacre, almost had his hand bitten by Arya. Thankfully, he pulled it back just in time, avoiding a painful death and a hard-to-explain resurrection. Byrne wanted Arya to bathe with her, and Arya agreed. Byrne thanked Licht for coming up with this idea for her. Arya asked Licht if he wanted to join them for the bath. Licht politely declined the invitation to bathe with them. The two girls headed to the secret bathroom. After 3 days of caution, a hidden door was opened, revealing a secluded bathroom, completely hidden from prying eyes. Byrne said that she had to hide this bathroom from everyone. Arya immediately stepped into the bathroom, tossing her clothes to one side. The two girls happily enjoyed their relaxing time. The assassin waiting outside clicked his tongue in annoyance. There would be no easy assassination for him tonight, because his target was not alone, and that girl was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. He didn't know where the queen was. He could only see Licht through a slightly open window. Just then, he shot a poison-laced dart at Licht, but after dying, Licht woke up as if nothing had happened, thinking he must have just dozed off. Arya and Byrne came out of the bathroom right after, and Licht asked if anything strange had happened, to which Arya nodded. Arya suddenly noticed the window was slightly ajar, which wasn't good for her spatial control ability, an ability that could only be activated in an enclosed space and would slow down time, giving her an overwhelming advantage. Anyway, the three of them decided they should get some rest before tomorrow, as they still needed to be on guard. Arya pulled the soft, fluffy tail of a stuffed fox over to use as a pillow and fell asleep instantly. Licht also rested on the sofa and woke up the next morning to the early sunlight. Byrne offered him a cup of coffee. While the demon lord woke up, Arya made sure Licht was feeling better after yesterday's incident when he dozed off in the middle of his duty. As she looked outside, she spotted a suspicious figure lurking in the shadows of the building below, stealthily watching them. Arya threw open the window, startling the guy. Arya entrusted Byrne to Licht. When they saw the person trying to flee, after getting a nod from Licht, Arya leapt through the window to chase after him.